afternoon. Time to have a look at what's happening on the market side. Starting off with things on the Asian perspective, we did see a bit of a mixed performance when we look at what's happening on that side. However, we did see Hong Kong and the Chinese markets closing sharply lower. European stocks boosted by hopes of slower U.S. interest rate hikes, and these talks emanated on Friday with some kind of conversation that the Fed is debating slowing down the pace of interest rate hikes, and they might signal that in their November meeting. However, even though that is the case, markets are still pricing in a 75 basis point hike in November. However, they have scaled back the bets that in December we might see a matching move. Meanwhile, when we look at the pound, that seesawed on news that former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was not in the running for the position for British Prime Minister. And we did see the pound at around rising at around 114 to the dollar handle. And this was on the back that former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak is the front runner for that position. However, even though it rose at around 114, struggling to hold that handle right now at about 113 to the dollar. Locally, when we look at what's happening, we did get a trading statement from Discam signaling that they are expecting a boost in profits. This amid controversy around its race-based hiring practices. That share price up 4.5%. To talk to us about the latest when it comes to the markets, we are joined by Jones Gondo, who is from Nedbank CIB. Jones, thank you so much for your time. Given the picture that I've just described with Hong Kong markets and the Chinese markets are sharply lower, how concerned are traders around the so-called new political regime in China? Are traders actually concerned about it?
I don't think they're concerned. I think it's continuity. I think the big concern is that the growth numbers that were delayed are out, and it's lower than the market expected. I think it's around 3.5%. And so there's a lot of work that Chinese administration needs to put in to start to lift growth in that economy. And of course, that has a lot of impact for a lot of emerging markets that export a lot of their commodities to China. And of course, they in turn export a lot of goods that are demanded in the rest of the world, particularly the developed world's consumption basket.
Bring it locally for a second. What do you make of the JSE's year-to-date performance, and what does that performance indicate about SA stock valuations?
Well, look, the year-to-date we're down like 11%, and I think that's it's a very disappointing outcome, given that, as you know, you were mentioning earlier, that a lot of companies are reporting better earnings and guiding for that. But I think where we've had significant re-rating has been tech stocks, basically Nasdaq's process. And that being such a big, heavy counter in our JSE, it's really dragged performance. Industrials haven't performed too well, but we've had fairly resilient performances from banks. The property sector has had a more recent bounce. And so, you know, when you start thinking about which sectors are looking like value, it's those that are paying dividends at this point in time.
What do you make of U.S. earnings season so far? I mean, the results don't look too bad at all, but is that enough?
Yeah, look, earnings season again is a fairly mixed bag. I think there was a big drag from tech stocks. Snap, they were down 28%. But then we also had fairly resilient earnings calls for the banking sector there as well. The big drag for them has been, you know, your big FANG stocks, your Microsoft, Amazon's, Alphabet's. And I think there the concern has just been a slowdown in advertising revenues, and whether that's a view to a consumer that is slowly becoming under pressure given the macro environment. But I think generally those stocks, S&P is up almost 2.5% on Friday. Same for the Dow and the Nasdaq. So it was a very volatile week for those international markets, but they recovered fairly well towards the end of the week.
Last week we were talking about the idea of value investing, and I'm wondering whether we're going to see the resurgence rather of the so-called value trade. Do you see it or not?
Look, over the medium term, I do. I think given the high volatility of these markets, there's bound to be stocks that are oversold but are still delivering on a fundamental basis. I think it just goes on with the earlier discussion saying that earnings still seem to be fairly robust, particularly in the US. And the value trade is still on. Tactically, maybe the hardest hit are those tech stocks. They're still massive counters, and I think probably tactically over the short term growth could trump value. But that's the thing with value investing, you have to take a longer through the cycle view, and I think there is some value to deliver there.
Before I let you go, company news or announcements that you are keeping an eye on for the week?
I think the big one is still more on the macro side for domestically is the MTBPS. But I think just generally thinking about the events of the UK might post a significant rally and recovery. The market seems to like that Rishi Sunak is leading. And I think that's how the market will trade on macros as opposed to stock specific at this point in time.
Jones, thank you so much for your time. That is Jones Gondo from Nedbank CIB. And of course, we are going to be giving you that full coverage of the medium-term budget policy statement on Wednesday, and as well as giving you coverage on the ECB interest rate hike decision, as well as US GDP figures. But that is it from me. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more news for you. Stay tuned.